of viewers like you.
Tonight on Frontline, an investigation into corruption in Mexico during the Salinas years. Correspondent Lowell Bergman follows a trail from Carlos Salinas, exiled in Ireland, to Switzerland in search of his brother Raul's secret millions.
I can't tell you if the amount was 200, 300, 400, or 500 millions, but I think everything's possible in this case.
And to Mexico, to a country and a family undone by accusations of kickbacks and murder.
Raul, my husband, he made a lot of mistakes, but he's not a murderer.
Tonight on Frontline, murder, money, and Mexico. Dublin, Ireland. Last spring, after a year of wandering, he came here to find a quiet place of exile. He is the former president of Mexico, Carlos Salinas de Gortari, once the friend of presidents, the architect of NAFTA. He is now the man most hated by his people, who left behind a nightmare of violence and political assassination, of economic collapse, revolutionaries and scandal, of dollars and decadence, and of unprecedented corruption.
Corruption has been a fixture of Mexican life at least since the Spanish got here. But there had never been anything like the Salinas corruption.
Once they were known as the Kennedys of Mexico, a political family, comfortable in the public eye. Today they are embattled, isolated, hiding from the press. A family drawn together by tragedy and an avalanche of allegations. It's a complicated tale. Adriana is Carlos's sister. Her ex-husband, her daughter's father, was a powerful politician, Luis Massieu. He was gunned down in the street, assassinated. But the tragedy for the family was compounded when the authorities named their chief suspect, her oldest brother, Raul Salinas de Gortari. This is the story of how Raul Salinas' arrest has exposed a legacy of corruption and scandal that has shaken the Mexican establishment and laid open the dark side of his brother's presidency, and how Raul Salinas benefited from their close relationship. For over 2 years, Raul Salinas has been held in isolation in a prison built by his brother Carlos. His family insists that Raul is not guilty, the victim of politics and character assassination.
We don't have any doubt about my uncle Raul innocence, because first of all we know him and we know he's incapable of the thing of murdering anyone, and least of all someone he liked and our father.
There's no chance or possibility in your mind that he might be guilty?
No, not at all.
The family says that the Raul Salinas vilified in the Mexican press is not the man they knew. At their home in Mexico City, Frontline correspondent Lowell Bergman met his wife, Paulina Castañón.
Most of the time he was at home. He liked very much to be at the house with the family. And we read books, we saw Mexican movies, we played canasta, him and me, and just a very quiet life. I know Raul, my husband, he made a lot of mistakes, but he's not a murderer, not at all. That's very different. Like human beings, we can make a lot of mistakes. Sometimes he wasn't a very good husband.
But Raul Salinas' mistakes His mistresses and mysterious millions, his love of the fast life, filled the front pages of Mexico's newspapers and provided real-life melodrama, like this secret video of his mistress extorting money from his wife Paulina. It was a soap opera, and that's what it became. Nothing personal, the most watched broadcast on Mexican television. But in the case of Raul Salinas, the truth regularly left fiction far behind, including a psychic accusing him of another murder and leading police to what turned out to be a planted body buried in his backyard. All wildly entertaining to the media, but not for the family.
Pues mire, para la familia, comprender esto ha sido muy duro porque...
Look, it has been very hard for the family to understand because we are in the middle of it. And it is tough for us when people treat it like a soap opera. For us, it's a daily drama that we have to live with in this house. So it is not cheap entertainment. To us, it is not a soap opera. It is humiliating.
Es vergonzosa.
Humiliating for the family, but for the country, Raul Salinas' case has become a key moment in modern Mexican history.
The arrest of Raul Salinas opened up the window to something everybody knew, but nobody could put his finger on, which was the institutionalized corruption in government circles in this country.
Andres Oppenheimer is a foreign correspondent for the Miami Herald and a consultant for Frontline, who has dug deeply into the Salinas scandal. His book, Bordering on Chaos, is a bestseller in Mexico.
It was an open secret to everybody that every president of Mexico since the days of the revolution ended up incredibly rich. Until the arrest of Raul Salinas, nobody had ever seen a check, nobody had ever seen a cable, nobody had ever seen evidence.
Estrictamente con la ley.
For almost 70 years, Mexico has been, in effect, a one-party state. And the party, the Institutional Revolutionary Party, the PRI, has stayed in power by institutionalizing corruption. The current president of Mexico, Ernesto Zedillo, promised to root out that corruption. So for the first time in Mexican history, he appointed a member of the opposition, Antonio Lozano, as Attorney General. He would wind up investigating Raul Salinas.
We found a house supposedly owned by a Mr. Gomez Gutierrez, but our investigation revealed that Gomez Gutierrez was actually Mr. Raul Salinas de Gortari, and he had a fake passport under that name, but with his picture in it and his signature. This is how we discovered that he had a false identity. Later, we discovered he had 3 or 4 fake identities. Then we discovered he had several businesses, and finally, we found he had accounts under his false name in Switzerland, London, and other places.
This is what Lozano found. A collection of luxury homes scattered around Mexico. Ranches, horses, and bank accounts with millions of dollars in Mexico, all belonging to a man whose main official job was as a civil servant in charge of national grain distribution. A civil servant who liked to go on safaris with his wife, his fourth, Paulina Castañón. A bureaucrat who put his wife's name on a Swiss bank account, totaling $84 million. She says she asked him about that money.
He wanted to explain me exactly where the money came, everything. And I told him, the only thing I want to know, is this legal money or no? And he wanted to explain me, but I don't know, I don't want to know about that money.
What do you mean you don't want? You put your name there.
The only thing I want to know is legal or not. told me, yes, it's legal. Okay, you're going to prove it? Yes, I'm going to prove it. Okay. I don't want to know who is the money, for what is the money. No, I've never asked questions. Mexican, not all the Mexican women, because now they are changing, but we don't ask questions to our husbands.
You want us to believe that your name is on a bank account with over $80 million in it, and you had no idea how much money was in the account? You had no idea where it came from?
No, I knew how much money was on the account. I knew. Not exactly, but I almost knew. I didn't have to ask where, why. I trust my husband.
That trust, she says, led her to accept a request from her imprisoned husband to go to Switzerland to pick up a passport in a safe deposit box.
Did he tell you it was in a different name?
Yes, he told me it was Juan Guillermo. And he's my husband, I love him, and I don't know if you're married, if your wife asks you something like, please go and pick it, you go and pick it up.
Switzerland is a long way to go. Weren't you suspicious?
Suspicious of what?
Paulina Castagnon, accompanied by her brother, flew to Zurich. And then they took the train to Geneva. She had errands to run, money to move, and documents to pick up. What she did not know was that she was expected. In Bern, at the headquarters of the Swiss National Police, Dr. Valentin Roschacher was interested in the same documents and accounts at a private bank.
We got information from the law enforcement agencies in Europe, informants, US law enforcement agencies from DEA, that the former Mexican president's brother could have accounts here in Switzerland under wrong names.
What Paulina did not know when she arrived at the Bank Pictet was that they had been told to alert the police if anyone came inquiring about certain accounts.
I asked to go to the safe deposit, and they told me there was something electrical, and I couldn't go in. So I say, okay, that's it, goodbye. And we went to the train station to go back to Zurich.
We did not know who she was, who was the guy in her company, and what she's planning to do. We didn't know then we saw her, you know, we shadowed her, of course.
And we were in the train station, my brother and me, and they arrested us. First I thought it was like a kidnapping. First, I was in shock.
Paulina Castagnon was detained and questioned for a month, then released as the Swiss investigation continued.
I'm convinced that we will know maybe very soon the whole truth. But, you know, right now she's not guilty, and I don't know how deeply she was involved. You know, she said, I love my husband because I trust him. It's beautiful, you know, that's the way it should be.
Even when they were young, the Salinas brothers had their share of scandal and politics. Their father was a long-serving member of the ruling elite, and at one time a contender for president. The scandal came when Carlos was 3 and his brother Raul was 5. In a game with another child, they accidentally shot and killed a 12-year-old housemaid with a .22 caliber rifle. Growing up, Raul was the protector, Carlos the brainy one. Raul became an engineer. Carlos went to Harvard, where he earned a doctorate in political economy. Even when he was young, he had his eye on the presidency. When he finally ran, it was for his first elected position. He had gathered a team around him, the Sandinistas. They had a mission: to modernize the Mexican economy and open up the political process.
I'm sure that there has been a deep political war for the last 10 to 15 years.
Harvard professor John Womack has been an intimate of Carlos Salinas since his student days.
The Salinas group was one of the few that, if not the only, that had a real strategic vision of where it was going and how long it would take and what kind of battles it wanted to fight.
And if he ran into a fight, he had his older brother Raul to back him up.
I think Raul and a few others were basically the reform group's muscle and money raisers. They weren't sweeties and softies and cream puffs. They weren't the kind of guys who would sit and write a book denouncing the traditional bosses. These are the guys who could go into the room and stare down the other guys.
Carlos Salinas de Gortari assumed the presidency in 1988 with what many charged was a rigged election. His promise to modernize Mexico began with the economy, selling off old state-owned monopolies, opening the marketplace to foreign investors, and deregulating.
A very, very striking and surprising and ambitious agenda. The modernization of Mexico, of course, is a very delicate thing because any brick you pull out, the rest shakes.
Professor Rudy Dornbusch of MIT is a free market advocate. He was an advisor to Carlos Salinas and remains an admirer.
Well, I think you'd have to say that he is superbly intelligent, that he's a strategist, that he keeps thinking about concepts and how to implement them both. He's a very, very strong manager. If he ran a corporation, you'd buy the stock.
And we did.
I raise my glass to a great leader, to President Carlos Salinas de Gortari, and to Mexico.
The United States government was enthusiastic about doing business with this modern Mexican president and wound up doing a deal called NAFTA, opening the Mexican market for the first time with its 95 million customers.
Carlos Salinas de Gortari, President of the United Mexican States.
He seduced Washington, he seduced the powers that be, the President Bush, later President Clinton. The Wall Street brokers praise Salinas, and the Mexican people say, hey, if this guy gets these kinds of reviews in Washington and New York, can't be that bad. Whatever the Mexican people will tell you now, the fact is that by the end of his presidency, he was one of the most popular presidents in Mexico history.
We believed that we were going into the first world, as Carlos Salinas told us.
Jose Maria Imas had a small business teaching the language of NAFTA, English.
We were working like crazy people, working all day. We increased from 4 teachers that we started this business. We went up to 250 people working in this school. It was incredible.
With privatization, more than 200 state-owned companies were put on the block, from banks to airlines, from telephone company to garbage collection. The profits were enormous. And with the new materialism came a new sense of confidence.
This was part of the Salinas attitude, and boom, it's good to be rich. Let's all be rich. We're all going to be rich. We're entering the first world. Nothing to be ashamed of. Wealth in Mexico used to be discreet. It used to be not ostensible. The very wealthy were careful not to show off too much because they knew that the gaps between rich and poor were so great in this country that if you rubbed it in and you sort of kept showing the poor how poor they were and how rich you were, One day the poor were going to get mad, and it was better for them not to get mad. That changed under Salinas. It became fashionable and acceptable to flaunt wealth.
And flaunting it meant every excess, from private planes and personal museums to private zoos.
It's privately maintained for the public? Or?
No, it's privately maintained for me. The thing is, I'm very much worried about the animals much more than the humans, so I take care of the animals. The humans, they can take care of themselves. So.
The lover of rare animals is Jorge Hank Ron, the gambling king of northern Mexico.
I've become a very successful man because I love success and I love being happy.
And he should be happy. He is part of one of the most wealthy, arguably the most powerful family in Mexico, key backers of the Salinas presidency. His father, Carlos Hank Gonzalez, was a billionaire politician, and his brother, Carlos Hank Ron, is the manager of the family empire.
My father became a very good politician because, well, he's a very good guy. And my brother became a very wealthy man in Mexico because he works a lot. He loves to work.
His father, Secretary of Agriculture in the Salinas cabinet, is famous for saying, "A politician who is poor is a poor politician."
He's a man who was, as he himself told me, was born poor, never inherited a penny, worked all his life in the state government sector, never worked in the private sector, and who, according to Forbes magazine, ended up with a fortune of $1.6 billion.
During the Salinas years, the number of Mexicans who made the Forbes list of billionaires grew from 1 to 24. Men like Carlos Slim, who bought the Mexican National Phone Company at a bargain price. He likes Rodin sculptures and now has the world's largest private collection. Roberto Gonzalez Barrera, a godfather to the Salinas family, now known as the Tortilla King because he wound up with a virtual tortilla monopoly in Mexico. And Carlos Peralta, who got a cell phone franchise which turned out to be worth more than $1 billion.
The trouble with Salinas' privatization plan was that he did indeed sell inefficient, old, corrupt state-owned companies, but he sold them in the end to a small clique of friends.
I think that's just nonsense. I think the privatization was a process with maximum transparency, maximum integrity, and rich Mexicans borrowed a lot of money to buy those assets. And they took big risks like Carlos Slim, and they got very rich on it. I don't see any trouble with that. And I'm not aware of corruption in the privatization process.
But there was trouble with that cell phone franchise which Carlos Peralta bought. He turned around and sold a minority interest to Bell Atlantic for more than $1 billion. According to a confidential document from inside Bell Atlantic, they were advised that the Peraltas were Mexican robber barons who have always, quote, had top-level collaborators in the Mexican government, close quote. In the middle of his deal with Bell Atlantic, Carlos Peralta wired, according to these documents, $50 million cash to accounts belonging to Raul Salinas. Bell Atlantic insists they knew nothing about the payments made by Carlos Peralta.
Why did Carlos Peralta give Raul Salinas $50 million?
Carlos Peralta says, and Raul Salinas says, that it was a fund that both of them and several other friends were setting up, and Raul Salinas was managing, for a later investment in various enterprises, allegedly in Mexico. Now, the question is, why would a smart, intelligent, successful businessman like Carlos Peralta and the others give that kind of money to somebody who didn't have any experience in managing money? It should have been the other way around.
Did they have a written agreement?
They didn't have a written agreement.
Did he have a receipt?
He said he didn't have a written receipt. Carlos Peralta says that it was a gentleman's agreement.
By now, Raul was making a lot of money. He needed help handling it all. So on the advice of a friend, he went to New York and entered the exclusive world of private banking. At Citibank, as this account application shows, Raul Salinas's references were waived because he was, quote, referred by a very reliable client of long standing, close quote. Carlos Hank Rohn. Raul's personal banker was Citibank Vice President Amy Elliott, who would use a special Citibank system called Confidas to transfer Raul's millions out of Mexico. Raul's wife, Paulina, never questioned the arrangement.
What has been reported?
I didn't ask him. I didn't ask him.
You didn't ask him when he said, deliver these cashier's checks? You didn't ask him?
Mm-hmm. To Citibank? I would, maybe, I would ask him, I told you, if it was a smaller bank or something that I think is something fishy. Why I didn't trust him? It was Citibank, it's Amy Elliott. It was open, it was his name, Raul Salinas.
And it was Raul Salinas's accounts that interested the Swiss, including the ones set up by Amy Elliott of Citibank. Since Paulina's arrest, the Swiss have examined at least 100 suspect accounts and thousands of transactions in 7 countries.
It's really a huge case. I can't remember if there was a case like this before.
How much money is involved?
We blocked about a little bit more than 100 million US in Switzerland. It could be a lot more, and a part of the money came into Switzerland and went out. So it's more that we blocked, and probably it's a lot more, but I have proofs for a little bit more than 100 millions, and the bigger amount I saw passing different countries, but I can't tell you if the amount was 200, 300, 400, or 500 millions. But I think everything is possible in this case.
When Paulina Castagnon was arrested back in November of 1995, she was told that the reason for her arrest was a Swiss suspicion that some of the money was connected to drug trafficking.
Laundering money and something about narcotics, and I was shocked. After a year that I was arrested, that everything began, I haven't seen any document or any people who said that it was drug money or laundering money. Not documents, nothing.
The documents the Swiss have on Paulina Patricia Castagnon and her husband Raul are in a room in the Swiss National Police headquarters called the Mexico Room. What these files contain has led Valentin Rohrschacher to a startling conclusion.
We are more convinced than when we started the case that this money is drug money, or the biggest part of it, or I don't know if it's every dollar here on every Swiss account is a drug, is a narco dollar, but we think that we are on the good way to prove that the money is our drug proceeds. Yeah.
You have live witnesses?
Yeah, and live witnesses, and I hope they are still alive.
What do you mean?
You know, it's dangerous for a witness to say, okay, this guy and this guy was involved in drug trafficking or gave protection to drug traffickers. It's not an easy thing to say, and even if it's the truth, you know.
What were the drug traffickers paying Raul Salinas for?
We are talking about protection, you know.
Protection in Mexico?
In Mexico.
From the government?
From people they worked for the government, for the police.
Officially, the police and the government under Carlos Salinas had committed themselves to an all-out war on drugs. With international pressure on Colombia, Mexico had become the major drug pipeline into the United States. But Carlos Salinas defended his government's efforts.
In Mexico, in the last 16 months, during my administration, we have seized 55 tons of pure cocaine. Street value of that cocaine is equivalent to 1.5 times the external debt of Mexico. Is it enough? Well, we will continue hitting them. by seizing the drug, destroying it, and putting in jail whoever participates in drug trafficking.
Despite his promises, Mexican drug lords, like the Arellano Felix brothers and Amado Carrillo, operated with impunity. They flew jet plane loads of narcotics into the country by paying off the police and officials at every level of the government.
When I started this case and I heard about the rumors and what the people are telling, how it works in Mexico, who's protecting who and who gives money, and the drug loads of 10 tons of cocaine, 50 tons of cocaine passing Mexico, coming from Colombia, going over the Rio Grande to the US. You know, for a Swiss cop or a Swiss judge, it sounds unbelievable.
What we have here, ladies and gentlemen, is the largest seizure of cocaine in the world.
And the profits are unbelievable. Huge multi-ton loads of cocaine poured north across the border. Mexico's drug cartels became the most powerful narco-traffickers in the world. Charles Intriago is a former federal prosecutor and an expert on money laundering.
The profits are astounding. If a quarter of that money that the U.S. estimates is made in this country goes to or comes from Mexico, you're talking about $20 billion a year, a massive amount on a daily basis, so that it's not a big surprise to me that of these allegations of massive amounts in payoffs, 150 million to this public official, another 10 million to this guy, 40 million a month to these people. There are allegations in FBI documents that are now coming out that there was $150 million a month in payments to Mexican public officials. That doesn't surprise me. That is peanuts.
The Swiss investigation into Raul Salinas' accounts follow a complex trail through banks in many countries. If any of that money proves to be drug-related, it could have serious consequences, especially for the U.S. banks involved.
I have my name on the door, and frankly, we hate being associated with something of that nature. We have been striving for 200 years to build a reputation. It's not to destroy in 2 minutes because someone has opened an account with us. So we have been cheated, and we feel very cross about this. They didn't come from funny places. They were bank transfers or checks drawn on very known banks.
Banks like Citibank, which under U.S. law could face serious penalties.
The implication as far as U.S. financial institutions go is that if it is proved by by that evidence that the money had an origin in narcotics proceeds, it could subject financial institutions in the United States that handled that money to prosecution for money laundering.
What are the penalties?
Penalties could be very severe for a U.S. financial institution and for its employees who are involved in those transactions. For a financial institution, there's a death penalty, so-called, in the U.S. law that could actually subject an institution to forfeiture of its license.
For over a year, Citibank and Raul Salinas have been under investigation by the U.S. Attorney in Manhattan and the FBI for possible violations of money laundering laws. The bank says it is cooperating with the investigation and, quote, "We have looked into this matter ourselves for any possible violations of the law, and in this case we have found no reason to believe there have been any," end quote. Vice President Amy Elliott has testified in her deposition that she had no reason to question the source of Raul Salinas' funds.
In her deposition, she supposedly said that when Raul Salinas came to her on the recommendation of another customer of her bank and started engaging in transactions in the $50 to $70 to $80 million range, first of all, she said that she cleared it with her superiors, but secondly, she said that she didn't need to explore the source of his money because it would be the equivalent of asking the Rockefellers where they get their money, and she was satisfied with his answer that his money came from the sale of a construction company.
The truth about where Raul Salinas got all his money will have implications not just for the banks down the line or any of the individuals involved. It will finally come home to Mexico and to his relationship with his brother Carlos, and to Carlos's political legacy.
What's at stake, I think, politically in Mexico is whether or not this reform group that emerged in the 80s will be entirely destroyed.
You're saying that if the narco-trafficking connection is made, that's the end of the Salinas group?
I would say so. If the U.S. government proves that Raul was involved in it, and that Carlos Salinas was involved in it, I think that that would put an end to the Salinas group.
While Raul was filling his overseas bank accounts, his brother Carlos was accumulating political capital. To keep his party in power and his own long-term influence within it, he would need cash, a war chest. So on February 23, 1993, with elections approaching, an invitation was extended for dinner.
All the 30 biggest businessmen, billionaires who in some way or another benefited from the privatization of state-owned companies. The wealthiest people in Mexico, all men by the way, arrived in their limousines. They had an idea of what it was about, but didn't quite exactly know what they had been summoned for. And at the dinner, they were asked to contribute $25 million each to the upcoming presidential campaign. $25 million each. It's a lot of money. That made together about $750 million. It was like way, way, way beyond what any American president ever got from the private sector or from anybody else.
Among the billionaires who came to the dinner were Carlos Slim and Carlos Hank Roan. Not all the billionaires were invited to that dinner. Juan Sanchez Navarro has always been politically independent. He says even if he had been invited, he would not have gone.
Tuve la suerte, verdaderamente,
I was lucky. I have to thank God that they did not invite me to the banquet, because I would feel very bad. It was a clear example of the intimate relationship, I would say perverse relationship, between the economically powerful and the national political system. That dinner really laid bare the connection between some businessmen and the government. I consider it an absolutely corrupt system.
And how corrupt is the system?
The whole system is a legacy of corruption that certainly in some aspects got worse under Salinas. But this is a system based on the belief that a single political party will dominate the elections. Elections that are never really clean. It is a system designed to serve a certain ruling class, a very specific political elite, and ensure that they determine the destiny of the country, and the people are never heard.
In the Mexican political tradition, Carlos Salinas picked his successor, another technocrat and a reformer, Donaldo Colosio. But Colosio may have been more than Salinas had bargained for. A popular candidate who began to talk about real political reform, he was also a threat to the old party bosses. Or perhaps a target for the narco-traffickers. Colosio's assassination was a defining moment for Carlos Salinas. He lost control of the succession. He wound up handing over the presidency to a political neophyte, Ernesto Zedillo, a man he neither respected nor admired. Perhaps he could still wield his influence from behind the scenes. But there was to be more bad news.
¡Viva México!
Carlos Salinas had put off devaluing the peso, and so when it happened, there was panic. There was an economic meltdown. Remember Jose Maria Imas and his language school? Once devaluation hit, his business loans interest rate went from 15% to 97%, wiping him out.
I would say that we bought the gold dream and we awake into a real nightmare. What happened is a nightmare, but it was real. The other one was a dream.
Jose Maria has joined a growing movement of debtors who say the banks have literally taken the shirt off their backs. For ordinary Mexicans, the crash has been worse than the Great Depression. And they blame Carlos Salinas. Political analyst Jorge Castaneda.
He really, in my opinion, did more damage to this country than any president in recent times. Because of his mistaken economic policies, because of his corruption that he encouraged and participated in, perhaps in his government, because of the authoritarian way he ran the country for 6 years. Mexicans believe that he is responsible for all of the disaster that the country befell them. They're largely right. They believe that he tricked them, that he fooled them, and that he ran off with the money.
Demonized by the public and, he says, made a scapegoat by his successor, Carlos Salinas was to face still another crisis. The murder investigation of his brother-in-law, Ruiz Massieu, by the new Attorney General had uncovered a new prime suspect, his brother Raul.
And it was a watershed moment in Mexico's history. This was a member of the presidential family in a country where the president used to be a king. This is a big deal. The Attorney General sent his troops to arrest Raul at his sister's home here in Mexico City.
There were more than 100 people around the house. They were clambering all over the walls. My daughter Daniela come down the stairs. She was very scared because she saw them through the window.
I told them that there were lots of people outside with machine guns and that I didn't understand what was happening.
And then Carlos sent his own bodyguards to his sister's house to protect Raul.
For a while, for like 10 minutes or 20 minutes that day, you had two armies virtually, the new government's army and the old government's army, rushing to the place where Raul Salinas was staying. And for a while, for a couple of minutes there, it sounded like there was going to be a clash between the old government and the new government. And in the end, the orders came from the presidential house saying there's a formal arrest warrant against Raul Salinas. And Carlos Salinas' bodyguards turned back and went back home.
Raul Salinas was sent to jail charged with masterminding the murder. But what was the evidence? The killer had been caught, and he implicated Raul, as did others. But what was the motive?
We have evidence from witnesses. There was both a personal and political feud between Raul Salinas and Mr. Ruiz Massieu, and evidence that it was Raul Salinas who gave orders to contract a killer to assassinate Jose Francisco.
But Lozano's investigation would fall apart with a media circus of psychics, buried bones, and fabricated evidence. He was fired. His chief prosecutor became a fugitive, and his deputy went to jail. Long before that, in shock over Raul's arrest and fearing that he himself would be charged with conspiring to murder Donaldo Colosio, Carlos Salinas fled the country. The new government is putting on its best face, proud that it has paid back the billions the U.S. government pumped into Mexico to save it. Jose Angel Gurria is the Secretary of Foreign Relations, the number 2 man. He knows the United States is worried that his government is under threat, that drug money is flooding into an already established system of corruption.
We are being told that some of that money is reaching all the way into Los Pinos, to the presidential palace.
I think I would disagree totally. I don't think there is any proof of that.
Under Salinas, under Carlos Salinas.
I don't think there is any proof of that. I would challenge anybody who said that, because I think it's a very serious allegation. I would say generally that the level of accountability of public servants in the last few years has increased exponentially, and that there are now many ways in which we can both identify and track instances of corruption. We have not rooted it out. We still have it at lower levels, and we're working on it.
Not enough, apparently. At a high-level meeting with the U.S. drug czar, Secretary Gurria introduced his new chief of drug enforcement, General Gutierrez Rebollo.
We also are delighted to meet for the first time General Gutierrez Rebollo. We know his reputation for focus, for integrity.
But the U.S. endorsement became an embarrassment when it was revealed that Gutierrez Rebollo was in the pay of the drug cartels.
You must have been shocked. I mean, you publicly vouched for his integrity.
Well, of course, I don't publicly vouch for anybody's integrity. What I do is deal with the representatives of foreign powers, and it was our view then, based on our own intelligence, that he was what the Mexicans thought he was an honest, hard-driving field operative, who they brought up into their senior ranks and who turned out to be a crook.
Not just a crook. According to sources in the FBI and DEA, before he was uncovered, General Gutierrez Rebollo had betrayed high-level informants who paid with their lives. But the evidence of high-level corruption keeps mounting, like this Deputy Attorney General for Narcotics during the Salinas regime, who, it turns out, was in the pay of the drug cartels at the rate of $1.5 million a month. And this Deputy Attorney General under Carlos Salinas, the brother of the murdered Ruiz Massieu, found by a Houston jury to have been paid $8 million by the drug cartels. So the question is, what did Carlos Salinas know about the corruption around him? And more importantly, how could he not have known of the possible involvement of his brother Raul?
You were very close to this Carlos Salinas, were you not? I mean, you were familiar with him, you were friends.
I was the deputy minister during his administration.
Right. And you were familiar with Raul Salinas as well.
Much less so, because he was not a member of the administration except for a fairly short period of time.
It's been reported that members of the government went to Carlos Salinas on a number of occasions and said, your brother is corrupt, he is taking money. Why didn't he do anything about it?
I was in charge of Mexico's foreign debt, so I was not privy to that, to those visits or those statements.
You weren't aware of it?
I have read in the papers the same information you have, and I think that's a question which should be asked to Mr. Salinas rather than to me.
And that's why we went to Dublin, only to find that Carlos Salinas would meet with reporter Lowell Bergman, but he wouldn't give us an interview. He's adept at handling the media, so he tried to give us his side of the story without going on the record. He would only confirm what he has said before, that he believes that all of these charges, including those against his brother Raul, are part of a conspiracy to stop the reforms he started, that he and his family have been made scapegoats, and that the charges of involvement in drugs and money are unbelievable fabrications.
Sentenced by public opinion immediately.
He has said publicly that he wishes he'd kept a closer eye on his brother Raul.
Hola, papito. ¿Cómo estás, papito?
Raul Salinas' family talked to him on the telephone from his prison cell. He is in solitary confinement, under constant video surveillance. The family says he is a political prisoner, the victim of Carlos's enemies.
Los derechos humanos, otra vez, Raúl, que han logrado mucho para que te traten como a cualquier otra persona que está ahí, sin ninguna canonjía, pero como a un ser humano nada más.
We have been defending my brother against this murder charge because we believe he is innocent, totally innocent, and we are going to continue to defend him. As for the other charges on the money, well, I think that has to be proven. And Raul is the only person who can explain it.
In addition to the murder, Raul has been charged with tax evasion and inexplicable enrichment.
Bueno, Raúl, un beso, Paulina.
And this past week, he was questioned in prison by Valentin Rohrschacher of the Swiss National Police.
Bye. Dios.
Their investigation continues. But Raul's wife, Paulina Castagnon, believes that in the end, the Swiss will prove her husband's innocence.
I've seen them, how they are, how they investigate. Very meticulous, very word by word, cent by cent. You know, I like the way they do it.
And you'll respect their decision?
I trust them. I trust the Swiss authority.
You know, I do not care if there is a brother of a former president, if there is a brother of an acting president, or of a movie star, or who else. I don't care about names or positions or levels or whatever. If somebody is a crook and I can prove that he is a crook, I will do that. End of the story.
Check out Frontline online to dig deeper. More of Frontline's exclusive interviews with Salinas' family and advisors. Profiles, photos, and maps of the drug cartels. A chronology and documents on Mexican narco power. Special reports, Mexican news coverage, and more at www.frontline.org.